based on this evidence? Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Was against my advice and wishes?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I'm advising you that I don't think it's a good idea for you to give this statement. Do you understand that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Well, so you understand that my advice to you is that you not say anything. You understand that?
Yes.
And you're 18 years old, that?
Yes, I do.
And it was your decision to go ahead and make a statement anyway? So you still want to give a statement despite my advice and counsel?
Yes, as long as something done about it.
Now, I want to attention back to the date the 3 little boys were murdered. If you would, on that day, did you go to Robin Hood Woods?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay. And who did you go there with?
Damien and Jason.
Okay. And when you went there, what happened when you got to the woods?
We sit there for a while, and the little boys came up.
Okay. What was you? Had you had anything to drink, or had you done any drugs, anything like that? Right?
We just listened, and all of a sudden he did, and the little boys come up and drank them.
Now, when you say that, prior to the boys coming up, what was Damien doing?
He was just sitting there, don't wait for him.
Okay. Was he drinking too?
Mm-hmm.
What was he drinking?
He was drinking beer.
Okay. And what about Jason?
Same time.
Okay. Did they appear to be intoxicated?
To me, it was.
What was he doing this time?
There was one kid on this. With his fingers on his up on it.
That's what you saw him, and what else was there?
He grabbed one of them by the ears. Or he grabbed one of them by the ears. Trying to pull his ear off or something. Because he got him pretty time of year.
Were the kids, the 3 little boys, were they saying anything or doing anything during this?
They were saying, stop, stop.
And what about the boy that you were hitting? Was he saying that?
And he was telling me to stop, and I stopped. And Damien told me to stop, don't stop. And I got on him.
Now, did anybody, at what point, or at this point when you're doing that, did they have their clothes on? Okay. Were they, at some point, did they get hit with anything besides your fist?
Stick.
Who hit them with the stick?
I think one of them was
Were you there when the 3 boys were killed?
Yes, I was there.
I like that question. When they threw them in the water, were any of them kicking or screaming or anything, or were they all unconscious, or do you know?
They wasn't hollering. One of them was just moving.
Moving. When you say moving, how was it moving?
He was wiggling like a worm or something like that.
Was this the one that was castrated, or do you know?
I don't remember. It's just one of them. All I remember.
Who threw them in the water?
Damien and Jason.
Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a special guest, people who have become fellow travelers with me in the investigation of the West Memphis 3. Their names are Nick Vander Leek. He's calling in from South Africa. And here in California, I have Lisa Wilson. Lisa and Nick, are you there?
We are. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. Thanks. Thank you very much. Thanks, Nick. There'll probably be a tiny little delay, so I apologize, Nick. But their book, they've just published a book, one of a trilogy. The title of the book is King of Freaks, Saga of the West Memphis 3. And it's available on Amazon right now. and we're just really grateful for them to take some time out of their day to talk about the book, talk about how they got interested in the subject. But before we get started, I could just do a little background on these two authors. Nick is a best-selling author and professional freelance photojournalist. He's in South Africa, like I stated. He's done some features for GQ, Iron Man magazine, Sao Bono, which is a magazine I've never heard of, and Country Life. He's also interviewed a wide variety of interesting figures, people like Morgan Freeman, some cyclists, Tyler Hamilton, Chris Froome, and a bunch of others. So that's Nick. And then Lisa Wilson, who's a co-author with Nick on this book and some other subjects, is she's been in Florida actually recently researching the Casey Anthony case. She's a blogger. She blogs as Juror 13th, if that's correct, Juror 13th. So that is a brief bio of Lisa Wilson. But Lisa and Nick, if you could talk about kind of your background as far as true crime and how you became interested in those West Memphis 3. One of you can start, please.
I'm going to let Nick take this one because, I can tell you a little bit about what we do. I think our narratives are a little bit different because they're more conversational than most. We're really interested in why people do what they do. It's not simply a matter of trying to figure out who did it or how it happened. Certainly that's a part of it. But really what drives us is why crime has happened, the psychology behind it. And certainly there's a lot of very rich psychology in this case. So Nick, why don't you talk about what inspired you on this case?
Well, just to sort of say how I got involved in true crime, and it's actually also how Lisa and I met. I was friends on Facebook with someone who ended up becoming a victim, a murder victim, and I sort of felt that her story wasn't being told, and I sort of got more and more sort of concerned about it and upset about it actually, and I was sort of waiting for her story to come out in the media. I was waiting for her parents to tell her story. I was waiting for her story to come out in court, and she just sort of seemed to remain invisible and unacknowledged. And very ironically, ultimately, Oscar Pistorius was found guilty of murdering an intruder, not Reeva Steenkamp, which is really odd. But as a result of that, I felt very sort of driven to tell her story, and through the process of that, people who were reading my work said you should really touch base with Lisa. They said that she's also got a fantastic amount of insight into the case, and you guys should work together. And so we sort of got in touch, and we seem to work as a really good team. I would come up with quite a lot of research, and then she'd find some other things completely different to me, and then we'd also second guess one another and make sure that we were on point. And and then after the Oscar books, we did Jodi Arias, and now it's been 2 or 3 years, and quite a few books later.
How many total books have you been involved with, Nick?
It's actually quite hard to say. I work at a really high work rate. I'm not sure if it's because of my magazine journalism, but I sort of just write sort of in a flourish where I have all the information sort of at hand, and so in quite a short period, I think we've churned out almost 3 trilogies on the John Benet Ramsey case. There are about 6 books on Jodi Arias. There are 3 books on Amanda Knox, and in total, it's I don't know, Lisa, it's something like 40 books, I'd say.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's
it
amazing.
is over the course of I think five or six different trials cases.
Gotcha. And it's funny because your Skype handle says Nick Vanderleek writing, what else? ? So it sounds like you definitely are attached to your keyboard. But I would love to cover those cases too, a little bit about Jodi Arias, Amanda Knox, and your kind of position on John Bonet. I think those are all fascinating cases. I followed a little bit of Amanda Knox. I found her to be a pretty intriguing individual. There's actually a picture of her and Damien Eccles, the central character of the West Memphis Three, together. Have you guys seen that picture?
Yeah.
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 So that's a remarkable one. So, so you guys have gone through some true crime ones. How did the West Memphis Three come to your attention?
It was actually someone who sort of contacted us, someone who's read, many of our books, basically, just said, you should really do West Memphis 3. And I think the way she wrote it was WM3, and I was like, what's that, And so that's really how it happened. It was simply just someone making a recommendation. And with the John Bonet Ramsey sort of narrative wrapping up, Lisa and I have worked solidly, like bumper to bumper, on the Ramsey case since September. Mm-hmm. We've written 8 books in something like 6 months or something like that, and we have 1 book to go, and it's quite an important book because it's the last book and sort of really sort of brings everything together. But I sort of wanted a time out from it just so I could come back to it with a sort of fresh mind. I really wanted to have the last book really sort of finalize everything. And so I sort of wanted to just sort of go into another case and sharpen some of the saws and things like that. You can imagine if you've written 8 books on the same thing, you sort of almost get a bit tired or a bit, I don't know, it becomes a bit stale, and so you need to sort of take a bit of a break from it. And so yeah, the West Memphis 3 story, I know it's for me an incredible scenario. That the crime scene alone is probably one of the most difficult crime scenes I think we've dealt with. Just a very, very difficult crime scene to work through. I'm not sure if there's even absolute certainty exactly where the crime actually took place. I mean, we know where the bodies were discovered, but I'm not sure if there's certainty exactly where things happened.
Yeah, I don't think that there's full certainty about that, but I think the prosecutor believed that it took place on the ditch bank, and that bank was slicked down. There was, the pictures of the luminol kind of indicated that there was an area where some terrific, immense amounts of violence took place. So I think that, at least in my mind, looking at that kind of luminol evidence, which was never entered into court, indicates that that's where the scene of the crime was for me.
I think that, go ahead.
Yeah, look, the luminol thing, obviously is an indicator, but if you take that and you compare it to all these other crime scenes that we know about, O.J. Simpson, Amanda Knox, and so on, you kind of have a contained, very definite area. It's sort of like, between 4 square walls or on a veranda or whatever. But you can clearly see where there's blood. You can clearly see footprints. Everything sort of almost on a kind of a canvas, right? Mm-hmm. And in this particular crime, because it happened entirely outside and in a very sort of almost like a wild sort of wilderness outside area, because of the time that the crime scene was exposed, and there was a search through that area that night with like lots of people trampling the crime scene. There was never a situation where someone came there and saw blood sort of lying, where you could visually just see the blood. You know what I mean?
That's a good point. Yeah, good point.
And in that sense, that the sort of invisible crime scene is kind of a difficult crime scene.
Yeah, so it was unique to your other books, and all the brutality of the crime was really something else. I mean, if you look at I assume you guys looked through Callahan 8K, is that correct?
I mean,
Not
yes,
really.
but go ahead. Nick. Sorry.
I don't know. I don't know if you're aware of this, William, but a lot of the Callahan stuff's gone.
I know that the site died recently, but I heard they put it back up. I don't know. I haven't checked it within the last 2 or 4 months, maybe, but I knew that it had gone down.
As of last week, it was still down.
Wow.
I mean, we've been able to go through some of the cached stuff, but yeah, no, that was really a bummer because I know obviously like everything is there, but
I was unaware of that.
Yeah, no, there's still quite a few resources out there that we've been able to tap into. I think it's interesting coming into these cases so many years after they've happened. There's actually a real benefit to that. I know, there's some people that have followed these cases for, 15, 20 years, and they're really well versed in it. But there's kind of this really interesting thing that takes place when you haven't, and you come into it with this like brand new set of eyes and ears. And you have this gold mine of information that's out there. It's just, like any other cold case, this isn't a cold case per se, but all of a sudden it's like some new people come in with a new perspective and also with experience looking at a lot of other things. And you see it with a different, pair of eyes. And so, it was funny. I mean, my initial reaction when I started looking at this case was very similar to how I felt when I watched Making a Murderer. I know a lot of people compare it because of the sense of victimhood and the public feeling like, the people involved were wronged. But I had such a different reaction. I mean, when I first started reading about this, like I didn't get that immediate sense like, the West Memphis Three were innocent. I wasn't like, oh my gosh, what have we done here? Like I really couldn't understand how the public could feel that way. Like why they wouldn't want to know more, like actually really dig into this, get behind, get past the sensationalism and really understand what happened here. This case is really, really disturbing to me. I cannot get those images of the victims out of my head. Like they just, we've covered a lot of stuff and we've seen some really horrific stuff, but there is just something about the image of those three boys in the woods that I really haven't been able to shake. It's very difficult.
Yeah, extremely graphic. I mean, when you came to this case, did you watch the documentaries first, or how did you address the HBO documentaries?
I mean, I think we typically, when we're doing this, I mean, it just kind of evolves. So we're researching everything at the same time. So yes, I mean, we've watched that stuff. We've read a lot of stuff. It doesn't necessarily drive us, but it becomes a part of the, everything that we're looking at.
I mean, the reason I bring that up is because after watching those three documentaries, that's the main reason the public perception of these crimes was that there was somebody else to blame, whether it was one of the stepfathers or the other stepfather. So that, I think, is analogous to the Making of a Murderer, where they,
Sure.
kind of bring up there could be somebody else or there's a miscarriage of justice.
I really didn't get that with this one. I mean, I would have to say, I mean, okay, in Making a Murderer, maybe, I can see where, people are a little bit, concerned about the actions of considering what happened to Stephen Avery initially. I mean, yes, I mean, people can look at that and say, wow, yeah, I mean, he really got screwed on that first deal. But certainly I think there's this crazy perception that like, the police are like out to get everyone, right? I mean, it's not to say that, investigations don't go bad and whatever, but it's really disturbing to us when these cases become all about botched investigations and, suspicious investigators, and the case gets lost, the victim gets lost, and people really lose their perspective. And so we try to bring that perspective back to say, hey, wait a minute, guys. Let's focus on what actually really matters in this case. Like, let's look at the evidence. Let's look at the people and their background and their families and their psychology and why things happen the way that they did. And then you kind of get back on track with what's really going on, Yeah,
that's a great point, because in this case particular, there's a lot of psychological records to reference. Yeah. Maybe not the same in other cases, but this, has that Exhibit 500 where you can really kind of key into the central figure of the case, Damien Eccles.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about like Paradise Lost, I really honestly don't get how people can look at that and not be concerned with Damien Eccles, where they can simply think that this is just a kid who likes to listen to heavy metal. It really doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, interesting. So as your kind of insider, as your investigation progressed, you kind of, it looks like from your book, you focused in on, people lying and kind of their personalities. Can you kind of proceed on that line?
Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. William, have you read much of the book?
I basically scanned through it. I can't say I read the whole thing in complete detail, no.
So I'm not sure if you went through the chapter about Killer's Lie, but
that's what I was referencing. Yeah, that's what I was referencing.
Yeah. So people are, the members of the public, even a lot of people on forums and so on, that they seem to sort of almost forget that, someone who's committed murder, that's like the extreme version of their sins, but it's not like murderers or they sort of commit murder and otherwise they're sort of honest about what they're doing. Everything's dishonest and they, but the point being that killers lie. Not everyone who lies kill people or murder people, but someone who reaches that point in their life where they feel that, they've got a reason or a motive to murder somebody, they're gonna, I don't really want to swear, but there's something effed up about them, and a lot of that is, they have deceits and so on. But anyway, killers lie, and that was really how I approached this case. Is sort of saw the first documentary. I didn't really want to look at the other two right in the beginning. I did watch West of Memphis, which really agitated me. And then there was another movie. There's some other movie that was made about it as well. I can't quite remember the name of it.
That was Paradise. No, it was Devil's Knot. That featured.
Yeah.
Yeah, Devil's Knot was it.
Yeah, for me the best thing about that movie was the fact that it made me think. I think it's at the beginning of the film. The guy calls it in and he says, "Well, they found something at Devil's Den, I think," and I'm not quite sure where the Devil's Knot comes into it, but and because that made me sort of want to really go and look for Devil's Den, and that's an area where I feel hasn't been explored very much. That's actually where I believe the crime actually took place. Is a little knoll called Devil's Den, and and that's a big aspect which I think brought a lot of protesters along, where you hear about the hysteria of Satanism and so on, and then people think, well, couldn't have anything to do with Satanism, couldn't have anything to do, and that's certainly not in, we've covered so many crimes, and that kind of thing doesn't tend to be not relevant to most of them.
Right.
But all these crimes are different. Right now I'm writing about Madeleine McCann, and there you have no body. There's no evidence of. We don't know whether she's been murdered. We don't actually know where she is. So every crime is different, but there are a lot of things that are similar. And in fact, in the Amanda Knox case, there's a. I think it's overblown though, but there was sort of allegations that witchcraft was involved, and Lisa will know this because she's been to Italy, but the Italians are very sort of religious and maybe a little bit superstitious when you have a crime like that. But it did take place sort of very close to
Halloween, right?
Halloween.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Manini, or whatever his name, I think he was listening to some kind of Roman woman who was like writing about Satanism or the occult or something like that. I vaguely remember something like that.
Well, Amanda Knox's boyfriend was sort of a little bit strange, was very into violent manga, but I mean, the point is it happened very close to Halloween. Stephen Avery case also happened very close to it. And, you know, what's interesting about this case is it happened on May 5th, and it was coinciding with a full moon. If you just look at the numbers, you know, there were three little boys, and for me, one of the simpler ways to understand this case is how do you, in an uncontrolled environment, you know, like it's not inside a home, it's not inside a building, how are you going to manage 3 victims at the same time? So it's not as though it's 3 victims over a different period of time, just 3 victims simultaneously. And that's not very easy to do. 8-year-old boys are fleet-footed. You know, 2 you could still explain, but 3 not very easy. And Jesse Muskelly is saying that, you know, he actually had to sort of run after one and sort of subdue him. Really has a ring of truth for me.
Me too.
William, I haven't read your book. But what I'd be very interested to know is, did you link the 3 boys to the 3 perpetrators? Like, did you have one perpetrator sort of attached to a particular victim, or not really?
Not really. I really didn't. I really just referenced Miss Kelly's repeated confessions, post-conviction confessions, and I actually just put them in the book in toto at the very end so people could read them. Because I think, at least at the time when I published that book in 2012, you know, there was only one Jesse confession. It took place in early June 3rd or whatever, you know, a grueling 12-hour period where he had his teeth pulled out and his, you know, all this nonsense. So that was really why I included those post-conviction confessions, some of which are recorded on audio. But I never really kind of detailed the way it played out. I just said that they were involved, and, you know, they all admitted to doing it at one time or another. So, but and I do think, and I you know, one of the reasons why I called it devil worship and deception is these guys are definitely involved in the occult. Damien still remains involved in the occult, and that was something that people said was a lie. It was a witch hunt, or this is satanic panic. They use these kind of loaded terms, kind of like conspiracy theorists. But yeah, you know, I think that all the evidence clearly points to them. I don't think that anything involving the stepfathers or anything like that, that's all kind of post-conviction nonsense that was dredged up by PR people and their defense.
It makes, I mean,
I must say, Lisa, I just want to say this quickly. I must say, if you buy into the sort of ritual killing thing, in other words, if you don't see it as somewhat random, if you don't see it as some kind of occult mindset behind it, then you're not going to see what I'm about to say now. When you do see that, then I really believe, you know, the title King of Freaks doesn't come from me. It's a name that Damien Eccles gave for himself.
Right. And
it's something I can read a little bit later if you like, but he basically, you really get the sense from some of the interviews that he gave, where he basically felt that he was transforming. And, you know, when he was, there's one particular interview where he says, you know, people will remember me forever. And, you know, and that might seem like a throwaway comment, but I really believe that Damien, at that stage, honestly believed that he was turning into some kind of occult apparition based on his psychology and based on his beliefs. In other words, he literally believed that he was sort of transfiguring into some kind of almost like magical, powerful being.
Yeah.
Now you might think that a crazy thing, and it is crazy.
No,
When
I think that's
you
true. I think
consider-
there was a psychologist who studied Eccles and said that, during his death penalty trial, and said that he believed that he was going to be transformed into a god at any time, and he was totally distracted from the trial. He had totally strange ideations, and then he even wrote post-conviction, he's taking Kool-Aid because he was transforming himself. Very strange stuff. And he kind of still emulates some of that strange kind of behavior. I remember reading recently, he was talking about how he could drink wine and taste the god of the wine, whatever that means. So I agree with you. I totally agree with you, Nick, that he is, there's definitely a very strong current of derangement with Damien Eccles.
Mm-hmm. He is, I think it's lost on a lot of people that he's mentally ill. And, there's all these celebrities out there running around saying, oh, this poor kid, just because maybe they felt jilted in their, childhood. And victimhood is a big subject matter for us in this narrative. And it was as well in the Fool's Paradise narrative about Stephen Avery, and why people associate with these cases. It kind of rings true for whatever happened in their life. And then, but yeah, you can't escape the fact that Damien is mentally ill, and a lot of people seem to ignore that. And I don't mean that as an excuse for what he did. It plays into it.
Agreed. I totally agree with you. It's actually part of the reason why the events happened on May 5th.
Yeah.
I just want to sort of get to the point about the three victims and the three perpetrators. I believe that each one is matched to someone else. So, for example, it would be Christopher Byers and Eccles, Stevie Branch and Baldwin, and Michael Moore and Miss Kelly. Now, that's not to say that that Miss Kelly, for example, necessarily killed Michael Moore. It's possible that he may have sort of gotten a bit, he didn't really want to go along with it, and then he left at a certain point. But I do believe there was a matching of three victims to three perpetrators, and how you sort of see this is if you buy into the psychology. I don't mean where you believe it, just where you say, well, this may have happened in this scenario. Then you basically say, well, so each of these three men were trying to sort of transform themselves, and they were using a young child, the blood of the child, the life of the child, to kind of infuse themselves with some kind of magical power. That was the psychology anyway. But what's really important there is that you need to now find the right energy or person to sort of give you what you want to get. It's like you want to drink the right energy drink kind of thing. And so you say, well, so how on earth could you sort of match them? Well, I think you've got to go into the psychology of an 18-year-old or a 16-year-old, and you've got to say, well, how would you choose your victim if you were in that situation? And the fact is, Christopher Byers was a skateboarder. He was only one of the three kids who was on a skateboard, and also had some sort of behavioral, let's call them aberrations. And he was sort of a kid with sort of brown hair and brown eyes. So he looked a little bit like Damien, a younger version, basically. But the important part there was that he rode skateboard. And when you read Damien's narrative, skateboarding was a big deal in his life. And at one point, I think he actually said, when he was younger, at one point he actually said skateboarding was his life.
Interesting.
He has a little boy skateboarding, and Damien's, trying to sort of resurrect himself or whatever. So anyway, that's that. If you take Stevie Branch, Stevie was a bright child, definitely standing out in some ways as his intelligence in terms of the trio of children. And of course he had blonde hair and blue eyes. And if you look at Baldwin was not blonde, but he had red hair and he was sort of a fairer guy. And I'm not sure whether Baldwin is smarter than Damon Eccles. I don't think either of them are very smart as it is. But as it stands right now, Baldwin wants to become a lawyer, I think, and he's studying.
He's supposedly writing a book. He put out a GoFundMe, made $30,000, and I think that was 3 years ago. So these guys have gotten their ability to obtain money from their supporters is pretty remarkable. Mm. But he hasn't produced a book yet.
He's quite a studious guy, and he was working in the library of the prison, and you get more of a sense of that from him, I think, than from Eccles. When Eccles talks about what he did when he was on death row, he's reading Stephen King books, and it's not really, I think at one point he said he was reading psychology, but then that didn't really interest him, and then he read history. I don't really get a sense that Damien can really apply his mind in an educated sense the way that Baldwin does. And then you have Michael Moore, who his father was the head of the Scouts, and I think at the time Michael Moore was wearing a Scout uniform, and in a very sort of basic sense, you have this little boy who is uniformed and his life is kind of regimented, but in a almost kind of fairy tale way. Someone who's wearing this sort of little uniform and
from a stable. The only one of the three kids who was from a stable home, right?
And I mean, and so Miss Kelly was, I think he quite liked the settledness of Michael Moore, but I don't really know whether Miss Kelly would have made a choice one way or another. I think the other two would have sort of made their selections or whatever. But what is interesting is, that there is kind of a match with these three victims to the three perpetrators. You might say, well, was it accidental? I don't think it was accidental.
Well, I mean, you're supported by the fact that people saw Eccles following the boys taking pictures. Do you remember that part in the case files?
I know that they found pictures in the briefcase, and that's another area that's just got so many question marks. Is why was there a briefcase? Why wasn't it linked to someone?
Right. Yeah, I mean, there were stories in the statements made to police about Eccles having a briefcase, pictures, them having drugs in the briefcase, all kinds of stuff in there. I don't remember the briefcase being entered into evidence. I don't think they found it.
Yeah. I do think, I would say, yeah, I always find it interesting, what ultimately is the outcome of the case. So, obviously these three were convicted, which means, a jury listened to this case and convicted them. And to convict three young people of a crime that serious and one to actually get the death penalty is extremely difficult. I mean, that doesn't happen all that often. People don't want to have to convict young people. I mean, and it kind of goes against our human nature. So, I mean, I think it speaks to how strong the case actually was.
It was actually cases because it was two different juries. They actually bifurcated it. So Miss Kelly was in a totally separate jury. So 24 people unanimously found them guilty.
Yes, great point. No, absolutely. And I think, so you kind of mentioned the families, and I think that's what makes this also a very interesting case is that when you look at everybody else in the periphery of this, the families, the neighbors, the friends, it's such a confusing web of people, and a lot of them are not very sophisticated, not very intelligent, from lesser means. A lot of them are liars themselves. A lot of them are criminals themselves. It makes it very complicated.
Yes.
And when you have, especially when you've got these families that, where parents are abusive or neglectful or whatever, it does create doubt typically in juries. So we've kind of touched on Casey Anthony a little bit, and you say, like, everybody looks at that case and and says, what the heck happened? How in the world could these people look at that case and acquit her? And then you take a look at her family and you start to understand, like, how messed up her family was and what that jury heard and was exposed to, and you start to understand the psychology a little bit there about just how you can get so stuck in like what's going on with everybody else, and then lose sight of what's going on with the person that actually perpetrated the crime. But that's something that's really, I think, really unique in what we do in our books, is that it's not a story of just the crime or just the people that are immediately involved. It's a story of the town. It's a story of the culture. It's a story of human beings. Like, I think people use that word evil a lot, and certainly in this case they do because of, the satanic worshiping. But we don't look at evil as like a separate entity. It's not something out there floating in space that causes people to do certain things. Everybody who's a criminal is a human being. And so, like, trying to understand what drives those actions is the most challenging part of these cases. And it's something that Nick, really brilliantly did in this book, and certainly, with the rest of the narrative that's to come, as well as in the work on JonBenet, was to understand the psychology from the perspective of the perpetrator, who we believe is the perpetrator, from their eyes. So getting into the mind of a child, getting into the mind of a teenager, it's very different than thinking about it like from our perspective, from an adult, that's lived a certain amount of years, that's lived maybe a more stable life. You're not going to see the case the same. You're going to look at these cases and say, there's no way they did that. I can't believe that. You can't look at it that way. You need to see it from a different view, a different level.
Well, that's a great point. Did you take the position regarding the JonBenet case that the most recent TV show did?
Yes and no. Okay. We do believe, in the position in our books is that our opinion is that Burke is the perpetrator of the crime, but this crime, I mean, it's not. There's a lot of different levels of what happened to JonBenet. There's the head bashing. There's the strangulation. There's the staging. There's the cover up. And so, if you're talking about who killed her, I mean, we believe that all of the Ramseys killed her, but we do have, for very specific reasons, a belief that Burke was responsible, and I won't go into great detail about that, but I mean, I think
people can read your books on Amazon. So if you guys want to see the full case, you guys have done accessible books, broken into parts where people can see what your conclusions are.
They should. And I mean, the reason why we have, so many of those books tied together is because it really does unfold, and it kind of unfolds as we're researching and as we discover things. I mean, sometimes things go in a different direction. So it's kind of, I hate to use the word fun because that sounds bizarre in true crime, but people that enjoy that journey of trying to understand something, I think they can kind of come on that journey with us, and it really does kind of evolve just as the cases evolve. Where we differ from what CBS did with their show was, how they believe that there was the pineapple and that JonBenet ate a piece. Her brother got mad and then killed her. Like, we don't. That piece of it doesn't work for us.
Okay.
That's not part of our theory.
Interesting. Yeah, and I mean that case is very. I mean, much like the West Memphis 3 case, that case is very convoluted. A lot of legal wrangling and changes within, the policing style, and whether the parents were going to be indicted or not. There's a lot of things going on with the JonBenet case.
Well, that's a really big case for for making that explanation of coming into it as a detective like Lou Smith or whoever, dealing with hundreds of murders or whatever. Well, have you ever dealt with a child killing another child? That's a totally different psychology. You don't bring in sadism and all that kind of thing. to the extent that you do with an adult into a scenario like that, within a family. And that's the other thing, is you've got to look at the family dynamic, and the family dynamic involves many sort of areas. One dimension is sibling rivalry. And, funny enough, today, even though Lisa and I have written 8 books on this Ramsey case, today I came across a very old case in Britain as part of my research into the Madeleine McCann case, and it's about someone called Constance Kent, and it was a 16-year-old, I think, half sister to a young boy. I can't remember how old, 3 years or 6 years old, and this woman, as a teenager, murdered her younger brother. Very, very brutal. Stab wounds. It sounded like the sort of murderer of Nicole Brown Simpson. Her head was almost severed from. Sorry, the little boy's head was almost severed from his neck. And you wouldn't imagine that a young girl would do this to her own brother. And I haven't really gotten much into that case, but what really struck me, and something I hadn't thought about I thought about it, but certainly not in really great depth. But what was interesting about that case is one got the sense that Constance killed her brother not because she hated her brother, and not because she actually wanted to kill her brother. She actually killed her brother to send a message to her parents who were making her life hell, and it's kind of like a way of her parents loved the little boy, and there's a lot of sort of dysfunction going on and people having affairs, and it was kind of a way of saying, can you pay attention to me? You know what I mean? And in other words, like almost a spiteful way of saying, let's make this about me, and forgetting that there's someone's life at stake and so on. And what is very interesting about that case is she actually confessed to a priest, the crime, and then there's a whole question about, well, should that, it's almost like priest sinner privilege,
Right.
That kind of thing's not admissible.
Right.
It's a really, really interesting case in that sense. Yeah.
Well, you can actually analogize some of those circumstances within the John Benet Ramsey family, that and the West Memphis 3, in the sense that these were older, kind of more corrupt boys who might have seen these younger kids as, more promising rather than their corrupt, seedy lives, of like pretty much ne'er-do-well teenagers, seeing these young kids, and that's part of the sacrificial aspect, but they might have had, some kind of jealousy with them. You never know, because both Baldwin and Eccles were just from trailer park, nightmare families. Baldwin himself is actually the offspring of cousins. His mother had sex with her cousin, and he's like here in the States, that's like kind of a joke people make about the South, and here they are in the South in Arkansas. One of the interesting things people have told me about west of Memphis too is that it's largely African American, but they barely are even brought up in the whole west of Memphis narrative. There are a few African American characters there too, but it's definitely, yeah. So as far as the West Memphis thing, there's a lot of elements going on there. Some of the other stuff is like just their deception, the occultism. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about kind of some of the stuff you found out about Damien Eccles?
Sure, we can.
I think the obvious, Lisa, I'll let you jump in a second. I think the obvious thing to start off with, what frustrates me about these cases, especially when there are documentaries like this making a murder as well, even the stuff surrounding Amanda Knox, is what I don't understand with a lot of people who are sort of like going, well, could they be guilty, whatever. Well, start at the most obvious place. Do they have an alibi? If you have an alibi, then that's the end of the story. If someone's got an alibi, that you can't implicate them, and then it's very simple.
Right.
And if they don't have an alibi, it doesn't necessarily mean they're guilty, but but what is the story? And when you look at all three of the alibis, I mean, Miss Kelly confessed, but later on he said he went to a wrestling match or something. None of them add up, and some of them don't add up really, really badly. There are multiple fake alibis, and
Miss Kelly's fell apart on the stand. Baldwin's attorney didn't even offer one at trial. He's recently been saying that his alibi was this young kid Dan Nam. I have him on video stating that Dan Nam, this Vietnamese kid, saw him at Walmart, but then Dan Nam recounted and said, I got it a week later. But he's still proffering that, and he actually stated that in front of Devil's Knot author Mara Leverett, and she didn't even bat an eye. She did not retract. She didn't go, oh, that's a deceptive part of the case, Baldwin. You can see that video at William Ramsey Investigates, where he lies and she doesn't do anything. It's incredible.
Don't you find it like, I mean, it's astonishing to me, like the gall that it takes to, we believe for various reasons that these people were, that directly did this, and like Amanda Knox, right? And then they go out and they go on these press tours and they write books and they go to parties and they're, smiling and on film. And that to me is, I think some people look at that and they think, like, at a very, like, just on the surface, they think, oh, well, surely they must be innocent because, look how adjusted they are. I mean, they're out there. I mean, somebody who killed Shirley wouldn't go out there and do all those things, but that's so naive. I mean, it does happen all the time. And I think it actually really speaks to the depths of their ability to deceive and to lie and to be okay with that.
I agree. I mean, when I watch Amanda Knox in some of these interviews on TV, she's a great liar, man. She's amazing. She keeps a straight face, doesn't blink. And Eccles, they don't ask really any of these important questions. I've seen just astonishing interviews that just make me just open my jaw wide. Like, what? Like, he'll be on NPR with Goodman, and the director of West of Memphis is talking about prehistoric beasts, these giant snapping turtles that materialized in the middle of nowhere and walked to the case and then disappeared. They walked there and scratched the kids and ate certain parts of their bodies and then dematerialized. And these people don't even question, like, huh? What are you saying? Like, there's stuff where they're on The View. And the same thing, I mean, I give Janine Pirro some credit because she actually kind of asked an incisive comment to Eccles. But it's incredible to watch Damien Eccles, who's guilty and remains guilty at law of of killing the kids, just move along. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yep. Yeah. No, I know.
I don't actually think Amanda Knox is a good liar. I think she's quite an attractive person.
Right, the Foxy Knoxy. How much money do you think she made on her book? Didn't she make $1 million or something at advance?
Yeah, she made quite a few million, and solicitor did as well.
Her solicitor did?
Yeah.
Well, who was her attorney? Was it an Italian guy?
Sure, that's going so far back into the case file. I think it must have been because it was in Italian court.
Yeah, they weren't American. She didn't.
Gotcha.
I mean, obviously they do have legal team here in America, but not that she did have foreign lawyers represent her during the case.
They sold the book to the Italian public. Yeah.
I'm not sure. At one point, Amanda Knox's book wasn't. She wasn't allowed to publish it elsewhere, and I think she also got sued for allegations she made against the police. And I think to date she's not paid what she was supposed to pay. In other words, for slandering the police.
Didn't she slander Lumumba? Didn't the black guy who was her boss at the bar? Didn't he sue her too? I don't remember.
Yes.
He did. As far as I know, she didn't pay him either. So.
Interesting.
But just to touch on what you were saying about the straight face, someone sent me a little video clip of Amanda Knox in a interview which I'd seen before, and when you watch these people being interviewed, you do start picking up on micro expressions, and you do see that they matter. It's not a case of sort of looking for things that aren't there. A lot of them do have these micro expressions, and they're trying to hide them. And in a particular case that I saw, she specifically asked, did you kill Meredith Kutcher? And the corner of her mouth tilts up, and she sort of immediately sort of covers it up, by sort of making a expression and answering the question. And I've actually tweeted that, and then someone found an even better example where she actually openly smiles and sort of looks upward, and then she adopts a very sort of more serious expression, and she carries on talking. And I'm actually it's really appalling to see, but it's also it's very universal. You actually see quite a lot of that kind of amusement, which they call duping delight, where people are saying, did you do that? And then they'll answer, as you say, with a straight face, but they're trying to mask the delight, the thrill of the fact that they know something that nobody else does. And when you take someone like Damien Eccles and Baldwin, they were very, as you say, they were sort of social outcasts. They were social losers. They were sort of in a very bankrupt society in a way, and so this whole adventure that they went on, this whole misadventure, basically gave them, in a way, what they wanted. They wanted to be acknowledged. They wanted to be recognized. They wanted, and as much as we can say, well, wow, for murder, but they have incredible support. They probably never had that amount of social. I mean, the social acknowledgement is like a tsunami. They've had films made about them. They've got book deals. They've got all this kind of thing. And from where they were coming from, it's an absolute almost validation or vindication of literally what they were doing.
Right.
It's
so
almost
they
like,
wanted to become. Eccles himself said in West of Memphis, "I want to be the greatest magician that ever lived."
Yeah.
He sacrifices 3 young boys, and fame, fortune, everything that the Satan's promises are, becomes realized. He's friends with Johnny Depp and Peter Jackson, these A-list Hollywood celebrities flying around, going to their houses, staying with them. It's really something.
Well, I think, if you really apply logic and you think about, put yourself in somebody's shoes, if you were truly innocent of something and you spent all of those years in prison for it, you would be so scarred and so upset about that whole experience for a number of different reasons, not only for your own losses, but the fact that it was, that it was on the back of 3 kids dying. When you come out of that situation and you get your freedom again, I really can't fathom somebody who is who's innocent wanting to be a part of all that pomp and circumstance. You don't ever see from those guys any sense of how they feel about the kids that were killed, or how they feel about their families. I mean, it's all about them. And it's always about them, and I think that's a real sign. I mean, it's not the only sign. Obviously, it's a lot of things that add up, but that's just another indicator that there's something very wrong.
Excellent point. Yeah, great point. Yeah, I mean, it's just something else. It's really one of the most unique for me criminal cases. Not that I've researched as many as you guys, but just the fact that post-release, everything leading up to a release, the fact that they raised $10 to $20 million. That they were able to hire the best PR people, the best attorneys, appellate attorneys in the United States, get out, and then be feted like heroes by the media, HBO, all these people. It's nothing else. I mean, when I first published in 2012, people just thought I was, some crazy person from the wilderness. They couldn't even comprehend that I'd actually read through the court cases and published. By the way, my book was put up on the Supreme Court of Arkansas website and sat there right under John Grisham's books. But John Grisham is actually a supporter of Damien Eccles and actually said yes. And I know that you guys read Life After Death, and John Grisham wrote this pleasant blurb about it. But anyway, that was just an interesting thing. But yeah, it's just it's really unique in that sense. This whole PR aspect, and God only knows who got paid off, who's getting paid under the table. I don't know.
You know what's
John Douglas.
Yeah, John Douglas.
Yeah, there's another one. I mean, every time I talk to people about Douglas, it's just like, yeah, they don't understand. Like, did he read the case? And I include a bit about John Douglas at the end of Abomination, like, and they titled one of the sections "Failure to Read" because he obviously didn't read the case. Because he did. He honestly says there's nothing in the case records that would indicate these people had a propensity for violence when they were all on probation or Eccles had been arrested and all this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, John Douglas deserves a narrative of his own. I mean, yeah, we have some serious issues with that guy.
Yeah, I mean, we came across John Douglas in the John Benet Ramsey case, and it was also like huge eye rolling. You know, it was like basically John Douglas said basically what John Ramsey's profile was. He basically just echoed John Ramsey's profile, and
do you know if he was paid by the defense or paid by their legal reps? Do you know if there was a relationship or how that worked?
He's always paid.
He was paid. Okay.
He's a hired gun, basically. And
do you have any idea? Was there ever a number bandied about? Did you ever find that out?
No. But you know, what I would like people to realize with Lisa and I is, you know, we don't sort of have a mercenary approach to true crime. You know, if we wanted to sell more books on the West Memphis 3 case, it would probably the business case would be to say why all three of them are innocent, and tell that story, because you know Damien has got something like 60,000 followers on Twitter. Also, Amanda Knox, she's got quite a lot of support. Same with Stephen Avery. The amount of people who support them are really vocal. I don't think it's quite as many as many people think, but it's quite vocal. Whereas the people who don't know or don't agree either don't say anything or they don't really care. But what I'm trying to get at is if we wanted to sell more books, Amanda Knox, Stephen Avery, and also West Memphis 3, we wouldn't be telling the narratives that we are telling. We don't come here with a horse in the race, not even a financial incentive. Basically, just come and we say, okay, let's figure this out. Let's figure out this apparent mystery. And invariably, there's no mystery. There's just a lot of PR. You don't really need to dig very deep in order to very quickly see a whole spectrum of obvious deceit. And for me, perhaps the most obvious deceit, William, you can probably attest to this as well, is just the very simple thing of where did Damien live at the time of the crime, right? In countless interviews, that's kind of his main sort of argument, is that he didn't even live in West Memphis.
He was in Marion, right? Is that what he said?
Yeah. So that's his story, and you never get anyone really nailing him down on that. You can nail him down on what he's saying by reading his book as well, by seeing exactly where he's saying that he lived or he didn't live. And it turns out he lived for years in those apartment blocks right in front of
the Mayfair Apartments. The Mayfair Apartments were across a ditch from Robin Hood Hill. So he looked one of those apartments you could look out into Robin Hood Hill.
Yeah. I mean, those apartments literally loomed over that sort of wooded area.
Yes.
And he lived there as a child, and this is what's so fascinating when you read these accounts from people who are prime suspects in murders, like Amanda Knox and like Damien Eccles, is if you don't know the case, you're probably going to miss it, and if you're not a very critical thinker, you're also going to miss it. But when Damien Eccles talks about the Mayfair Apartments, he says, well, he doesn't mention Robin Hood Hills at all. He doesn't mention it being right across from there. He doesn't mention it. when he talks about being a little child growing up there, he says, well, he would dig holes to amuse himself, and that's it. So he never went to swim in a sort of creek there. He never went to play in that sort of forest where all the other kids were playing, where those 3 kids were murdered. He doesn't mention that at all. So it's those sort of holes in the narrative that are a real problem. Yeah. Another thing is when you just do a little bit of research and you look at where everyone lived. You find a map and you go and Google Earth and you just go and look at the addresses and you just find out that's where that person lived. And it turns out you have Baldwin, Dominique Tier, and Damien's father all sort of living in the Lakeshore area, right. Which is
trailer park
on the it's a trailer park on one side of the highway. And then you have the Robin Hood Hill sort of in the center, and then on the other end of, if you had to draw a diagonal line, you have Damien Eccles where he was staying. What was it called? The Broadmoor? Broadway. Yeah, something like Broadway trailer park. And so in order for Damien to get to his father or Baldwin or his girlfriend who was pregnant at the time, he had to, if you draw a line connecting where he was staying to Lakeshore, the line basically goes right through Robin Hood Hills, and not only that, it goes through the sort of neighborhoods of the 3 victims. So, and he didn't have a car, and that's the other thing people have got to remember. It's not so, you would be driving around there. This was an 18-year-old guy whose girlfriend was pregnant and was living off mental disability checks. And he's walking, 4 or 5 miles a day. It takes about an hour or so to walk that distance. And he's passing through these neighborhoods every day. And it's another thing he mentions in his book is he was constantly walking. He was always walking around, kind of thing. What happens when you walk around? You see people. You in environments like under bridges and whatnot. And if you're doing that every day as a teenager, those are your playgrounds.
Right.
And so I'm just saying this whole idea that he didn't live in West Memphis makes me wonder. Someone like his wife, Laurie Davis.
Right.
Did she, when he said things like that he never lived in West Memphis, doesn't that like set off a little spark in her mind where she goes, well, actually he did, but it's no big deal? And it just makes one wonder how many times would she do that? Oh, well, he said that's not really a big deal, it doesn't really matter. Something that really blew my mind was that Damien Eccles actually got married on death row. And, he was sort of saying how isolated he was or whatever. I'm someone who's pretty isolated as an author. I'm writing constantly. I don't sort of interact socially that much. And yet, I was watching Damien giving interviews to Larry King and so on, and he's eloquent. He's very socialized. And on the one hand, he's saying to Larry King, no, I don't really get to talk to people and blah, 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 blah. Meanwhile, he's having 3-hour conversations once a week with someone who eventually married him. I mean, that's quite a fabric of contact, And that's besides journalists.
Yeah.
It's an interesting point about Laurie. I mean, I think we all, you kind of wonder about people in that situation. Like, what is he saying to you, and why do you believe it? That could be a whole other narrative too, or people. And we've talked about this actually in other cases. We did certainly in Jodi Arias's case, like where her family shows up to court and and in interviews and stuff like that. I mean, although they weren't in a lot of interviews, but like towards the end of the trial, they really supported her in her story that this was self-defense. A guy that she stabbed 28 times, slit his throat, shot him in the head, that it was, a lot of those stabs, by the way, were in his back, that it was self-defense. And you think, what in the heck, like, how how can these people believe these stories? I understand it's your loved one, I get it, but how can you truly stand there and say, I support this person, I believe them? You know, what's going on in their minds? And yeah, no, I think I've often thought that with Lori too. Like, what does she see that, like, you know, that we're somehow missing? And obviously then you have to dig into their background. Yeah. Admittedly, I don't know much about Lori. I'd be very curious to study her a little bit more.
People have researched her and had trouble verifying certain dates and times where she was, supposedly in New York. And there was a rumor going around that she actually had sent letters to other people. Not just Damien, and Damien was the one who responded. So she might have just been farming for some death row inmate. You know, I think it's just one of these weird phenomenons where some of these women, like there were women who latched on to, was it Richard Ramirez, the guy, the Night Stalker? He had women writing him and fighting over him. This is a guy who like did unspeakable acts against other people. So Damien Eccles, same thing, you know. People have speculated when is their relationship over. I guess they have like there's a third party. It seems to be like another woman who's something's going on. So.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen her photograph with them. Yeah. So.
And then Bundy had a bunch of women who were in love with him when he was executed as well. You know.
Yeah, it's very strange. Very strange.
But you know what? I think William, you sort of touched on it briefly. I think the attraction of these people is I don't think that they would acknowledge it themselves. It was basically through this person, no matter what they are associated with or accused of, but through this person is a vessel towards significance. So as the person in the public that's sort of, you know, some kind of anonymous person living what they may feel is a bit of a meaningless life, they latch on to the narrative of a, this criminal, and they then become significant, they become acknowledged, they become activated, and they become part of the narrative themselves. And Lori features in a movie, and that must feel very good, and she gets to meet people like Jackson and Fran Walsh and all these people, and that beats the insignificance and the anonymity of the previous life. And I think that in a number of ways that justifies why I'm not going to think about, you know, where Damien lived or him mentioning that. I'm not going to bother about that. In other words, it's I'm getting more out of this than I'm losing. So that's basically it.
Right.
Well, there's a couple. Yeah, no, I think there's a couple different psychologies that play into that. I mean, obviously there's your outright, you know, let's say gold digger mentality, where, you know, you're gonna gain something and you're aware of it and you go after it, and there's that. But then you have this other personality, and I think sometimes a lot of it could potentially be subconscious, but I think certain people, they thrive on the ability to like find somebody who's like seriously broken, and then like Nick was saying, I mean, one benefit of that is that, you know, you're kind of filling yourself up because now you're interjected into something that's bigger than you, and you've got exposure and people care about you. But then there's also this sense too of like, you know, I'm gonna be the one to put this person's life back together, and that's gonna be on me, and then I'm gonna get the accolades from that. Right. And, you know, and so I think sometimes if you were to confront somebody like that, they may not even be aware of it, or maybe they are to some extent, but I think like some of them, and maybe Lori is one of these people that truly believes in their mind that like, yeah, this person had some troubles in their background, but it's not that bad, and we can actually fix it, and we can go on and have a good life, and everything could be all rosy and sunny. And, you know, it sounds crazy, but you can actually see where people thrive off of that.
Absolutely. It's called hybristophilia. It's actually, people talked about that in some of the West Memphis 3 message boards, or Bonnie and Clyde syndrome. There's some lady who studied them, and is exactly what you're talking about. I can change this person. He's not the same as he was. Yep. You know, everything's changed, and so they have all these rationalizations why, you know, everything's different. So yeah, it's very remarkable. So
yeah, it is. It's fascinating.
So we've.
Have you noticed?
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to mention this. Have you noticed how Damien Eccles' narrative is so self-pitying. It's so
Yes.
much about how he's suffered and you know, he's dying and he's ill and he's going
His
blind.
teeth are
and
about to fall off.
he had to learn how to, yeah. His teeth are falling out. He's got to use, he had to use his
Reiki.
hands.
He's got to use
eat.
Reiki, the magical touch Reiki, or else its teeth would have fallen out.
Yeah. He had to learn how to walk again, all this kind of stuff.
He had to piss
Now,
blood. The guards beat him so bad he pissed blood. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I think is going to be very interesting with Laurie and him going forward, I mean, he's only been out of jail a couple of years. But what's really interesting is it's one thing to have these guys in jail and everyone's fighting for their innocence and justice and whatever. But now you're out of jail. And now that whole narrative of poor me and how badly I've been treated starts to becomes a bit long in the tooth, because you're now out of jail. So now you've now got to get a job and have a life and be a decent citizen. And what if you're not? What if you're not a decent citizen? I mean, how long can you play the victim? Presumably for a fair amount of time, but then eventually
it's still going on. They're interviewing him about a recent or an upcoming death penalty. Somebody's being put to death in Arkansas. Somebody he said he was friends with, and he's been making the publicity rounds on a couple podcasts, saying, you know, the same old story, the sob story, and the kind of host are saying, oh yeah, you were so unjustly convicted, and keeping this kind of narrative alive. So it's still happening. I mean, it's current. He said he was going to go back to Arkansas to witness these deaths.
Now that he's out, I think that thrill and that, you know, I'm saving you. Well, he's now saved, and now you've got to live with one another every day. What's that like?
Well, that's a good point. He's under probation until 2021. He's convicted of first-degree murder. I assume it's tough to find a job, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't know how I think he survived selling his artwork.
He's done tarot reading and he's done the odd photographic exhibition. But, you know, William, what's so interesting with these cases is when you look at it from, in other words, you draw a thread from the backstory, you know, the where these people originated from and their background, the crime scene itself, and then the aftermath, after conviction and so on. And what's very interesting with Damien Eccles is, you know, you might say, well, now I think this whole Wicca thing is overblown, whatever. But if you look at him today, you look at his Facebook photo, which is like a mirror image of Aleister Crowley. You look at how he conducts himself, the tattoos and so on. He's still very interested in the occult. You're going to look at his Twitter page. It's got like a weird signal, sort of insignia. I'm not saying that that's satanic, but it's certainly part of Damien's personality is that he's really interested in these dark subjects.
Right. And prior to the crime, and all the way today.
Yeah.
I mean, he's associated with some very hardcore occult figures. People like Genesis P-Orridge. There's pictures of him with him. And some of the people who came out of the woodwork to support him in Salem were associates of P-Orridge. And I don't know if you heard the whole story of Mike Platt. You know, Mike Blatty lived in Salem when Damien Eccles was there. Mike Blatty was the son of the recently deceased Peter Blatty, who wrote The Exorcist, which was a book that was found with Damien when he was arrested. And Blatty was actually Mike Blatty when he was in Salem. He's moved to Oregon now, but he was on the message boards of the Patch, which was kind of the local Salem message board, and the kind of commentary that went on there, I can send it to you guys. But it was very fevered. I was involved. Mike Blatty was involved. And, so Mike Blatty and I have kept in touch. We actually
William, just going to Salem makes a statement.
Well, he's made that statement. Nick, he's made that statement that he felt comfortable in Salem because that was the home of the witches. So why would you say that? Why would you say that you're comfortable in the home of the witches if you're not? If this is supposedly a witch hunt, because
if you look at his Instagram, Damien Eccles' Instagram, he's got photos of himself in front of the doorway where Aleister Crowley had an apartment
in New York, right?
And Yeah, and I think he's sort of there to celebrate his birthday or whatever, his what 130th birthday, whatever it was. And then when you take that and you go back to trial, and people are asking Damien about, does he know about Aleister Crowley? And Crowley's a really, really dodgy dude. Also a guy who fancied himself as a god, but a kind of a not a very benign dictator. Spiritual presence, but of a. He's just the way he presents himself talking about Crowley is sinister. And so to have this person as your idol and your model, and then you go.
Well, that's what Eccles said on the stand. He said a guy who believed he's a god, just like you said, And that's the reason why I got involved in the case, was that part of the video that I saw where the prosecutor, I think it was Price, was asking him questions about Aleister Crowley. Do you know a little bit about this guy?
He sort of says it in a way where he's almost like in court saying, yeah, well, he thought he was a god, but in a way that is playing to the jury, not in a genuine way, not what he genuinely believed.
Well, he's admitted within the last couple years, Damien Eccles has said that he was prosecuted, and this is his own writing, he was prosecuted because of his love for Aleister Crowley, which is a fascinating statement within the context of that trial, because up until that trial, the prosecutors and people investigating him did not know the totality of his interest. So he's confirming that he had an interest by stating that in the last couple of years. He's confirming he had an interest prior to the events of 1993. So all that stuff was missing. And I included in my book the fact that his mother was taking him to bookstores to find these books, and that he had access to all these other books, whether it was a Wiccan book or Once Upon This Broom or a Broomstick. All these very different books. He was definitely reading them. But Crowley, and the fact that he wrote in Life After Death, which you read, that he had done the Holy Guardian Angel ritual, which Crowley said it was Satan. So he's saying that while he was in jail, he was trying to contact Satan. He's trying to say that in veiled, Crowleyan terms. And he's a member of the OTO. I don't know if you guys came across that, but he was a member of the Arkansas OTO, and gave the Arkansas OTO his library.
Yeah. Well, what I want to address in the second book, Freaks of the Forest, is I've done a little bit of cursory research already, but I want to sort of really immerse myself and the reader into that narrative. Is the sort of Wiccan. Wiccan, by the way, is another word for witch or witchcraft, and at the time, Damien did, when he was in court, he said that's what he was. He said he was a Wiccan. Now, they've got rituals. They've got some very well-known rituals that have to do with rebirth and all sorts of things. I think there's one that's called the Great Rite.
Right. Yeah.
And there's a lot of information around that has to do with numbers and dates and procedures and rituals and so on. And there's another aspect that I think people are quick to dismiss or not even think about is if Damien was a student of this stuff, then what was he actually a student of? And you see there are these rituals of rebirth, and it involves things like blood and certain animals like dogs and times of day and the moon and et cetera. It becomes very compelling in that particular area, So that's something I really want to address in detail. Some of those rituals and how that played into the whole thing. I did cover to some extent in King of Freaks our history, our human the human sort of endowment.
Right?
Yeah, and when you and that's what's quite important to acknowledge is you look at people watch the documentary and they think there's hysteria around Satanism, and Satanism is this sort of very exotic, crazy notion, and yet it's really, I'm not saying Satanism specifically, I'm just talking about this ritualized human sacrifice. Mm-hmm. People who are Christians are buying into a kind of ritual sacrifice where a person dies and his blood washes over everybody. And in other words, it's actually far more part of our society than we willing to admit. And that's part of what Lisa and I do try to do, is to locate these crimes in society and say, this is not evil.
Right.
This is you and me. This is the fabric of society.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, what I encountered when I was researching this case, not only people saying it was a witch hunt or a satanic panic, but they would quote this Lanning report that said there were no occult crimes. So in my book, I reference tons of occult crimes that show that people who are motivated by occult ideas commit crimes, and that the crimes are a direct result of their occult philosophy. And I think the FBA, this Lanning report, is very deceptive. Somebody just recently sent me that, the Lanning report proves conclusively there are no such things as occult crimes. Well, they just had something in Texas where 2 illegal aliens killed a woman for occult reasons. So it's preposterous to actually think that, if you actually can read and do your own research yourself. So, to believe that Eccles is motivated by occult ideas is not beyond the pale, particularly when you realize what he thinks of himself. You read about what he talks about, whether the king of freaks. He says, I mean, you know the thing. He says, here's an artillery captain, a fiercely grinning fool with red flayed cheeks, Damien by name, never to be Michael Hutchison again. So this guy, and this is another aspect that you talk about, this idea of transformation or rebirth. It's really a constant theme in Eccles' life. He changed his name from Michael Hutchison to Damien Eccles. This idea that he's changing is definitely prevalent. So occult crimes are out there, and it's too unfortunate that people can't realize that fact.
Yeah. Lisa, are you still there?
I'm here. I'm listening.
So, guys, we've gone about an hour 22 minutes of recorded time. So, I think we should kind of wrap this up. Is there anything that you guys would like to cover before we call it quits?
I want to touch on something very briefly. Anthony Hollingsworth.
Yes.
That's a very interesting family. How all the relationships there. I mean, that is just a crazy bunch of people. But
I said to you, when I was doing some editing, there was one night I sent Nick a message. I'm like, can you please help me? I'm like, who the hell I seriously was brain dead one night. I'm like, I can't keep up.
The family trees are very complex, you're right? Like who's cousins with who and what's going on.
Exactly. It's crazy.
Yeah. So something I just want to put out there to you, William, also to the listeners, is a possibility, which is, Anthony saw Damien and another person on that service road, right?
Right, the family, the Hollingsworth family.
Yeah. But they basically thought, because they also related to Dominique Tier, they thought that Damien, this is the night of the murder, around about, I think it was 9. There's a little bit of discrepancy about the time. Some said 9:15, others said 10:15. But the point being, they saw Damien and another person dressed in black, covered in mud, walking down the service road. Also wonder what Laurie must think of that. But the interesting thing is, they thought that they saw Damien with Dominique Tier, right? And the prosecution's case was that it wasn't Dominique, it was Baldwin, right?
Yeah, both with long
hair.
They
both had sort of red hair, yeah. But what if they did see Damien with Dominique Tier? In other words, what if Dominique was there? And I'm not sure whether whether she has an alibi and whether that's carved in stone, but it certainly is a interesting thought if it's actually the West Memphis 4.
Agreed. Well, it could be the West Memphis 5, the West Memphis 7. There might have been other people there if you include the strange events that happened at Bojangles. Yeah. Some guy walking into a bathroom covered in mud, which the area in Robin Hood Hills had to have been muddy. So, you know, it could have been a bunch of people. I've always thought there were more people.
You know about that sketch that that Damien drew with the 4 tombstones?
Right. The 4 tombstones, the full moon, the pentagram, the baby rattle. Right.
Now, for me, it kind of makes sense, 3 victims, 3 perpetrators, but Dominique Tier was definitely a player by default in the whole thing because she was pregnant. And I don't know if you, I'm pretty sure you would know this, but there was also talk that they both of them had agreed on sacrificing their child.
Right,
you know,
that's right.
That was something that...
Was it Deanna Holcomb or I forgot? No, yeah. I think Deanna Holcomb said that there was that discussion. I think, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you can really see a scenario where if Dominique was totally into this activity, why wouldn't she have been there that night?
Well, excellent point. She's definitely, Nick, she's definitely involved. There's a picture of her in the case files where she is standing there. She's got her left hand held across her chest. And that's actually, I was found out later after reviewing that is actually an occult gesture. You can actually see Johnny Depp making the same gesture, Aleister Crowley in his famous magical pose. What it represents is, I will keep the secrets of the cult quiet. And so she was definitely, and there were lists of her, the cops made lists of potential cult members or people who were involved. There was tons of other people who talked about the cult. There one guy, Elvis Clem Bly, his reference. And Damien Echols had a downward-facing pentagram carved on his chest. So these people were heavy duty. They weren't dabblers. And,
I agree.
And Dominique Tier's cousin was in San Bernardino writing some kind of weird vampire literature. Did you ever hear that story?
No.
Yeah, look up that. So Dominique Tier's family had her relatives had some kind of weird occult thing going on in California.
Okay.
Was that something Damien also said? He said I'm a blood-sucking vampire or something like that. Didn't he say that?
Right, yeah. Oh, well, and then Dominique Tier, she was interviewed by the police, and she said, Mom drinks blood, sister drinks blood, I drink blood, no big deal. I got to find that quote. So she said stuff, too. So she's...
You know that little scene, something that bothered me, too, was towards the end of Paradise Lost when, after they've been convicted, and they show her, you know, really upset. And they, I forget exactly what the conversation was, but it essentially was like, you know, they were saying, she was basically saying, like, she didn't care about anybody else. She didn't care about the victims. She didn't care about their families. She didn't care about any of them. And she says it over and over again while she's sobbing. And I was like, Jesus, I mean, like, that's like, you know, I get if those are your emotions at the time, but that just, again, that was a very abnormal response to have for somebody for children that were murdered, you know?
There are so many things at the end of that first one where the responses are totally abnormal. Why would Damien Echols say, I'll be the West Memphis boogeyman, kids will look under their bed? Why would he say that if he was innocent? There's another clip where they're talking about no more beer, you know, which there was the rumor that they were drinking beer that night. So, and he's just laughing it off like he's not attached to the gravity of the situation at all.
And then, you know, Baldwin makes the comment, too, that, you know, when he's asked by his lawyers, you know, do you think maybe you should rethink your friends? And he's like, yeah. And he, you know, basically says he doesn't, you know, in paraphrasing a bit, but he basically says, you know, that he shouldn't be friends with Damien and that he probably won't be, you know, going forward. And, you know, so it's like, why would you say all those things if there weren't issues there, you know?
True. And you see those pictures of them together. They're sitting at the table. And Damien Echols looks like a normal man, and Baldwin looks almost like a wayfish, tiny little, easily dominated guy next to him, just like a sidekick. It's really, it shows their relationship, you know. Not
a cool part of the book cool part of the book that I really liked that Nick did a great job with was talking about why these 3 picked each other to be friends, you know, why they even came together the way that they did into this perfect storm, which is a really interesting conversation. So I think people that read the book will enjoy that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Anything else? Anything you'd like to add, Lisa?
Not so much. I mean, just, I mean, I kind of mentioned that we're working on Casey Anthony and also the Madeline McCann case. So those are going to be coming up this actually May, June, July this summer. So we seem to be on this very ghoulish tear of dealing with murdered kids. It's been pretty heavy. But
and those are all
but yeah,
available on Amazon. Is that correct, or is there another place that they can find them? Do you have a website?
we do have a website. It's shakedowntitle.com, and you can get our books from there.
Okay.
And we are also on Amazon, and you can check us out on Twitter as well. We're regularly on there, as well as Facebook.
Under your name, Lisa Wilson, is that right, or something else? Shakedown Title?
Yeah, so we've got both on Facebook as well as on Twitter. We have a Shakedown Title account, so you can look there. My Twitter account is Lisa WJ13.
Okay, Joe
And
13, right?
yep, and then Nick is High Res Life, HIREZLIFE.
HIREZLIFE at Twitter, LWJ13 at Twitter, and Shakedown Title is ShakeDownTitle.com, just like it's spelled out, right?
Correct.
Great. All right. Thank you guys so much for being on the show. That was an awesome discussion.
Great
Really.
talking to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Let's keep in touch. And I really recommend this book. I'm looking forward to 2 and 3. But all the information in here, you guys have definitely done your homework. So I really appreciate that.
Cool. Thanks, William.
All right, guys. Have a great day.
You too.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.